Absa. Thanks so much, Oscar, for joining us today. I mean, inadequate financing and capital is cited as a primary challenge, to the development of the SME sector on the continent. The question to follow naturally is, why are banks so hesitant? And bottom line, is the risk associated with it simply higher?
Yeah.
Right?
I think the biggest challenge, obvious for the country, is really to get the SMEs up and running, because we know that they're the primary creators of employment. I think from an Absa perspective, we open for small business. We've opened to fund small businesses because we realize the importance that small businesses play. But the risk is a big challenge. And I think, as a bank, what we have done is that we're not only focusing on financial support, we also provide the non-financial support, which is critical in mitigating the risk. Things like coaching, mentoring. I think we have recently realized in the research that's been done that most of the businesses don't necessarily fail because they don't have the tools, but they don't understand how to use the tools. And I think that's where the key focus is, and that's where you can mitigate your risk elements.
Oscar, it's Lindsay Williams in Cape Town. Thanks again for joining us. I was speaking to someone from the micro-lending industry just a few days ago on Power Lunch, and we were talking about unsecured lending. Now, unsecured lending to the man and the woman in the street has been in focus recently, especially when you see the results out of banks like yours and the other big three. But what about unsecured lending to small businesses? Is there a brick wall that one comes up against if one doesn't have security to back your request for a loan if you're going to start a small business?
I think the biggest challenge you'll face if you approach it from a traditional lending point of view is you're dependent on security. And we've realized that most of the small businesses do not have security available. And I think from an Absa perspective, we're starting now to look at some of the innovative ways. How do we fund businesses that don't have necessary security? Things like contract funding, things like invoice discounting is starting to come into the small business environment, where traditionally that type of funding was only available for corporates. And I think that's where the focus is going to be. Let's understand the cash flow of the small business and fund it from that cash flow basis. And that's where I see that banks will make a huge difference.
So obviously you're exploring new financing models that take into account the high risks that's associated with lack of collateral. What about exploring something like flexibility in loan terms? I mean, just how flexible have you had to become in order to cater to a market like this?
I think it all depends on deal to deal that you encounter, and I think the biggest challenge is obvious the relaxation of funding and making sure that you've got a good understanding of what that SME is looking for and what type of products that you normally would offer that will tie in with the type of cash flows. In some instances, and I think in this time of economic times, we've realized that most of the small businesses, they don't get their payments on time. And how do you as a bank respond onto that? And we've seen a lot of engagement with government trying to negotiate some of the terms for our small businesses so that we can allow them to flourish.
Oscar, you as a bank and we as a country have got a lot of catching up to do, because I'm just looking at some fairly astonishing statistics. I mean, since democracy in this country, it says here, a study of emerging firms has revealed that in the second quarter of this year, only 12% of businesses that existed in 1994 were still in business. Only 6% of the country's working adults ran their own businesses. I mean, if you look at countries like India and you look at South Africa, how far are we behind, do you think?
We are. My view is that we're still behind, and there's some work that we still need to do to catch up in terms of the different ways we look at small businesses, the type of credit policies we have for small businesses, and the appetite for commercial banks for small businesses. And we have learned in the last couple of months and as we build up and coming out of the recession that the understanding of the small business cash flow becomes very critical, and also in making sure that you build up a sustainable foundation to allow them to nourish, the issues around creation of markets for small businesses, the issues around training, and also more importantly, the education system in our country needs to support small businesses.
What about accessibility? I mean, promoting access to finance, addressing the issue of financial inclusion, it goes beyond having financing models in place. Actual accessibility in terms of physical representation has got to be just as crucial.
It is, and I think that's one of the reasons reasons why, from an Absa perspective, we saw it important that we create development and centers across the country to try and give access for small business to visit, and more importantly, for information, because most of these small businesses, they indicate that they don't know where to go when they have gotten opportunities, and I think we're making it much easier for them to access us through those development and centers.
Once the money has been made available, let's assume that somebody comes to Absa, you allocate an amount of money to them. But then after that, that's only the start. You talk about training and you talk about assistance once that loan has been given. But Mike Schussler, who helped conduct some research on your behalf, says the government must free up regulation in favour of SMMEs. Now, do you work closely with government to that end? Are you trying to make things easier as well, not just with the money aspect?
No, definitely. I think one of the things that we're doing through our enterprise development, we participate in some of the policy formulation with government, but we're also continuously looking for opportunities within the regulatory environment to make it easier for SMEs to do business.
Obviously, that operating context should impact in a big way the risk-reward characteristics of these businesses down the line. Oscar, thanks so much for joining us in studio this afternoon. Oscar Siziba is Head of Enterprise Business at Absa.